Thank you for joining this InnoPower 2021 Day 1 panel discussion on how to compete and thrive in high growth sectors. According to research, diverse companies have about 19% higher revenue. They have about 1.7 times are more likely to be innovation leaders in their market, and they're about 70% more likely to capture a new market. So for Indiana employers, diversity hiring and advancement can't just be a passing fad. It is important, and the business case for diversity has proven that having a diverse team, a diverse leadership team, is a smarter and more profitable way to do business in the global market. A diversified workforce is more than just an item to be checked off on your employee branding list. It's a real business and competitive advantage. So this discussion will focus on how Indiana corporations and businesses can differentiate themselves to be more competitive in business and work. In particular, how Indiana businesses and corporations can recruit, attract, retain, and leverage diverse talent, business leaders, and entrepreneurs to advance innovation. Noting that the recruitment of diverse entrepreneurs with innovative ideas often requires mentorship, sponsorship, championship, opportunities for finance, legal advice, and strategies to make it big, right? That's everybody's goal, to make it big. So with that, I'd like to begin by introducing myself. My name's Angela Freeman. I'm a partner, intellectual property and patent attorney at Barnes & Thornburg, where I primarily focus on procuring protection for my clients' intellectual property, including their new inventions and innovations by way of patents, trademarks, and copyrights. I'm also very excited to serve as the moderator today with an esteemed panel of leaders in our local business community. And I'll ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves with their name, title, and company. And I'm going to start with Christian.
Love it. Well, hey, Angela, it's great to be here. My name is Christian Anderson, and I am a partner at Indianapolis-based venture studio High Alpha.
Thank you, Christian. Okay, Ted.
Hey, Angela. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Thanks for inviting me today. I'm a regional director for the Great Lakes region for VMware, which is a software company. Headquartered out of Palo Alto, but we have plenty of employees here in the Indianapolis area and a number of different varied clients. So we're always looking for good candidates. So I'm excited to be here and represent the company and share my story.
Thank you all both. I'm going to go to Mark next.
Hi, everyone. Wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is Mark Caswell, and I get to serve as CEO of Resultant, formerly KSM Consulting. We're a data technology and digital transformation consulting firm headquartered right here in Indianapolis. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Mark. And finally, Noble.
Hey, hopefully everyone can hear me. Angela, thank you for hosting, and good to be here. My name is Noble, last name is Madhu, and really happy to meet everybody. I am the founder of MC Introductions, and we help place candidates into really cool roles, and we have a professional network that creates match meetings between people to streamline and facilitate business.
So thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today. It's great to have you here. I'm going to start off and start with a pretty important topic. Our topic today is competing and thriving in a high growth sector, but I'd like to define exactly what is a high growth sector. So I'm going to start with Ted, and others can chime in afterwards to ask the fundamental question of what qualities and characteristics would you assert are necessary to make any city or industry like Indianapolis a high growth sector for diverse professionals and entrepreneurs to compete and thrive?
Well, I think this is a great question. I think that determining a high growth industry, you also narrow your focus just a little more. So within these industries, technology, we have companies that are old dogs, you might say, that are They've been around for a long time. We have some that are very young and entrepreneurial. And in fact, where I live, they're hatching, birthing, incubating some of these companies. And then you have some that are kind of in the middle. So I think that it's really where are your skills matched best. But typically, your high growth companies, they're selling a lot of whatever they have, right? Their growth pattern doesn't go like this; it kind of goes right like this. Also, given the demographic, you will find that they are a very common, almost like an iconic name. So, we used to not say copying, we used to say Xerox. I mean, now you snap someone, right? So those kinds of things from my perspective. And then for at a deeper level, you'll find that there is a need to be certified in a certain specific skill, and that will tell you where the growth area is at as well, because people are looking for a specific skill to help them meet this competitive or this momentum that clients are demanding. So those are kind of the informal ways. And then you can always do the old traditional research, and there's plenty of it out there by Googling certain technologies, looking on YouTube. Any kind of mass learning tools will help you identify what the real growth industries are within technology.
Anybody else have it? Thank you, Ted. That was great. And really allows us to kind of lay the landscape of what we're talking about here. Christian, Mark, Noble, anybody want to add to that before we go on?
Angela, I'll throw maybe one additional thought building on Ted's comments. Please. Which when I think of high growth industries, I think of industries that are far outpacing the balance of the economy and are doing so really efficiently. And, as the old saying goes, to a hammer, the whole world's a nail. And I am a software as a service hammer, so I'll apologize in advance for that. But you look at SaaS as an example, high growth industry, when done well, super capital efficient, grows by orders of magnitude year over year, and creates really a disproportionate amount of value relative to the value that it consumes. When you look at a tier one software company, those are companies growing 3-4x year over year with 90% gross margins. And the reason that matters is when it comes to creating wealth at the kind of national level, state level, city level, and individual level, attaching oneself to these truly kind of high growth industries, it's really the most efficient way to do that. And personally, I believe it's probably the most efficient way to develop an economy.
That's great, Christian. Thank you for that. Mark, Noble, do either of you have anything to add before we go on?
Completely agree with both Ted and Christian. I think what Ted said on momentum is key. There is this palpable energy that kind of surrounds an industry where you feel that. You feel that in SaaS right now, as Christian said. I think one important thing to note, to differentiate between kind of a fake kind of high growth industry and a real high growth industry, is a real one that has this underlying market need that's being addressed in a new and exciting way, or perhaps a market need that didn't exist before that people have discovered. And you've seen that a lot in SaaS. SaaS, just as a general concept, addresses a market need that businesses have and individuals have that hadn't been effectively addressed before. And because that's true, that drives a lot of consumption. That consumption creates businesses and all kinds of different needs. And that's where that energy and momentum comes from.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So I'm going to move on a bit, and I want to ask, now that we've kind of laid that landscape, how does Indianapolis as a city fare in this regard? So when you consider Indianapolis, and we've talked about SaaS, we know the technology industry is booming nationally, and part of that's a bit driven by COVID, I think. But how does Indianapolis and its business, STEM and tech sector fare with regard to the qualities that you all just indicated as being necessary for a high growth sector or a high growth city or community? And what characteristics do we provide in that regard? Anyone want to jump on that?
Sure.
Anybody.
Angela, I'll go first.
Please.
So I think we have to remember, because I've I've lived in Indianapolis most of my life and been fortunate enough to work in the technology area most of my life, is that from a technology perspective, the world has been flat for a long time. So there are many ways to avail yourself to the industry that are not bound by geographic characteristics. So I've worked for large companies, I've worked for small companies, and they've been headquartered in other areas, and yet I work with the local chamber of commerce. So there are great characteristics, personality-wise, just acumen-wise, that Midwesterners bring to the technology space. Don't be fooled. But the world is flat, so you can find great startups here in the local area. I think you have to search for them a little harder. But the other thing is the world is flat. So great minds that live here in Indiana can attach themselves to all kinds of companies, not only nationally, but internationally. So the world is flat, at least from a technology perspective, and there are a lot of opportunities. So Indianapolis fares well. We just have to learn how to network and bring what Indianapolis has, that flavor, if you will, to the industries in which we pick.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that really provides a great segue to my next question, which I'm going to run on to, which is, what untapped resources it specifically does Indianapolis and the Midwest provide that may or may not, be available in other areas of the country with regard to the business and tech acumen that you mentioned, Ted, that may not have been or is not being fully leveraged to uniquely position our city, our business community, in front of diverse talent, diverse professionals. I mean, I get all the time. Remember, I'm an Indianapolis resident from Kentucky, and I get all the time. People are just not aware of what really is happening in the Midwest with regard to entrepreneurial services, entrepreneurship, business growth, technology. I think we're kind of being slept on. So tell me what you think Indianapolis uniquely provides, or the central Indiana, maybe not just Indianapolis, but the state, to really compete, going back to our compete theme, with so many of the other geographic areas that many people think about when they think about technology, like California and other places. Anyone?
Yeah, I can speak on that first. I'm pretty sure someone can probably follow up and give some more perspective. So I'm from Dallas, Texas. I know a few people from Indiana. That's probably why I'm on this call too as well and on this panel. But I was not aware of Indiana about 4 years ago. I didn't really know much about Indiana. I didn't know about the tech scene there. And I was very pleasantly surprised when I got introduced to the tech scene. I met some great entrepreneurs from MEI, Minority Entrepreneurship Institute, Jalen Smith, Jamal Robinson, and being able to just connect with a lot of people from Indiana has been really interesting. Indiana is an essential location, access to a lot of great places, East Coast, Central, South United States too as well. Great talent, good hub, a lot of great support from the government too as well. I think those factors should be exciting for any entrepreneur, especially young entrepreneur like myself, being able to come into a city that actually cares about entrepreneurship and that has not really tapped all of their resources to really create the environment that's needed to excel entrepreneurship. So I think young entrepreneurs need to be more exposed to Indiana. And if Indiana can create, I would say, more events like this, more in-person events whenever the world opens up even more, and just like invite more people from out of state too as well to see what Indiana is doing, to really touch on those huge benefits that really transcend beyond just your typical technology hub, and really highlighting those different unique points that Indiana brings to as well. Because people that are in LA, Dallas, Miami, New York, all those hot cities, they don't really understand what is in Indiana. So I think the awareness is the first step.
I love it. Angela, can I jump in there?
Sure, please.
Noble, that was great. And Angela, I grew up in Arkansas, so I have this same kind of provincial background where when I'm with friends and family in that neck of the woods, they're like, "What? Indiana? What?" And so I grew up in the South, but went to school here. And as many of my friends know, I have such a deep affection for this city that I named my only son Indy. So if anyone questions kind of my affection to the city, they can go jump in a lake. But, ultimately, people don't live in states, they live in cities. And we get into this, oh, you're from Indiana. I'm like, no, I'm not from Indiana. I'm from Indianapolis. It's kind of like, oh, you live in Austin, so you're from Texas. No, I live in Austin. And Noble, I know you're a Dallas guy, but you get what I'm saying there, right? So, Indianapolis is, I think, in many ways divorced from the balance of the state, psychographically, demographically, politically, culturally. And that's not to say there aren't wonderful things about the balance of the state, because of course there are, but Indy is unique, it's different. And, if we were at a whiteboard, the way I would try to illustrate this, and what I believe personally makes Indianapolis so unique, but also having so much latent potential, is the overlap between access and opportunity. And when I think about the Bay Area, that is a huge orb of opportunity, capital, talent, progressive culture, oceans, big airports, universities, et cetera. But in actuality, your ability to access that's relatively limited. Where those two Venn diagrams overlap, right, the access orb is quite small. Now, conversely, you go to Topeka, Kansas and have lunch with the mayor every Monday if you wanted to, right? You have all the access in the world you want, but it's not operating kind of at scale. And what's interesting about Indy is that it has many of the benefits of a very large city operating at scale, and many of the benefits of a smaller community where you're able to access that in a big way. So think about two very large orbs that are very profoundly overlapped. And that doesn't mean it's not without its challenges around that access as well. And hopefully we'll dig into some of that as we progress. But if you look at just the raw material, there's very few cities in the country that are operating at the intersection of those two orbs, quite especially as Indianapolis is.
I love that, Christian, because you express what has been my personal experience with Indiana as well. And Indianapolis, to your point, not Indiana, but Indianapolis. Now, I didn't go as far as name my baby Indy. Okay, so maybe I'm not as in love with Indianapolis as you are. But my experience has been very similar in that when I moved here, I saw, and it has grown over the last 20 years I've been here, but a big, small city, right? Bigger than the little city I came from, but smaller than big cities, which is a very nice comfort level for me. But where professionals not only had access, to your point, but I saw a very thriving middle class African American and diverse community that I had never seen before. And with the access, literally you can call anybody in this city and say, hey, I know Mark, Mark knows you, Mark told me to call you and get a meeting. And that is your point about access, right? Yeah. That you can't do that. You said you can have lunch with the mayor of Topeka, Kansas, right? That's kind of how Indianapolis is. It doesn't take too much for people to open their doors and give you mentorship, insights, whatever you need. It literally just about is, hey, I know somebody that you know, and they sent me to you. And I think that is something that is very special and is very unique to that Hoosier hospitality, that Midwest kind of, humility and humbleness that comes that I don't think is appreciated or exists every single place. So that's really good. And I appreciate you mentioning that, because it's not something that you're going to necessarily see on any metric or any, survey that is considering the value add, but that is huge. So thank you for mentioning that. Mark, go ahead.
I might jump in there. So we're in scale-up mode as an organization. So we've gone through two private equity exits over the last couple of years. And so I had the opportunity to stand in front of people and describe the company. But as part of that, you described the headquarters of Indianapolis. And I remember this conversation came up about one of the things that differentiates central Indiana, really Indiana generally, but it, I think, combines with economic focus here in central Indiana. It's just how darn helpful people are. I mean, there is no one that will not help you. I have these conversations 90 days in with new employees at our company, and I'd say half of the people, when I ask them what the most surprising thing about the company is, they say how helpful people are, but it extends to the whole community. It's not just our organization. What's interesting is as we've kind of engaged the community, our mission includes the community inside of it and helping the community thrive. And as we've engaged the community, there's this just massive number of people who are willing to mentor, who are willing to give internship opportunities, to give things like factory tours or come to a classroom and speak, all these experiences. And then there's this tremendous number of people, many of whom are in the diverse community, who are interested in those types of things. And yet there's this disconnect between the two. I think, you kind of asked, what's the untapped resource? I think connecting those two things together is probably one of the best things we could do over the next 1 to 5 years to really boost the diverse community inside Indianapolis.
So that's great, Mark, and again, provides a great segue to my next question. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that a little more, about the challenges and the obstacles, some of the barriers that, Indianapolis, the city, the state may face with regard to making some of those connections between diverse talent, diverse professionals, business owners, and entrepreneurs, and the resources that Indiana may provide. And let's start just with the elephant in the room and the obvious, which is, Indiana, for someone like me, I said I come from Kentucky, and Christian, I don't know your experience in Arkansas, but, coming from Kentucky to here, it's pretty similar in that I was a diverse woman in a non-diverse community. That's kind of what I've known to be my status quo. So moving from Kentucky to here and being in corporate environments and STEM environments where I'm the only woman or the only woman of color or the only person of color in the room doesn't really shake me, because that's all I know. But obviously, if you are a diverse professional who comes from a Dallas, like Noble, or a Austin, or a Miami, or a DC, where that's not your everyday experience, and you come to Indianapolis, there are going to be some challenges there, right? I mean, that's not your everyday experience when you walk into a boardroom, or you go a whole week and don't see anybody who looks like you. So let's talk about some of those challenges, because they're real, and we're not having a real conversation if we don't address some of this. So tell me, what are not just some of those barriers, because I think certainly the people attending this conference know the barriers, but what are some of the resources that are available to business community leaders, business leaders, diverse leaders, and non-diverse leaders in Indianapolis that can begin to help bridge those gaps, such that when a diverse professional from another city who is more diverse than Indianapolis comes here for business purposes, they're not put off by what seems to be a lack of diversity in either this city or the business environment. Who's going to take that one on?
I'll go first, because
okay, you go first.
Because then I can sit back and hear everybody else talk. No, So I think if we're talking about the big elephant in the room, let me go sit in its lap for just a second, if you'll indulge me. I think one of the things you have to do is, my brother and I, brother who lives in Chicago and I live here, and we both lived in both places. When he was young and single, he had a different set of priorities. I'm a different person. And so there is definitely an Indianapolis vibe that as an African-American, you have to adopt. And it's not necessarily that you can't bring your authentic self to everything that you do, but you just have to understand there's a little different reaction to some things. There's also really some good things here. And that's why I told my brother I had this conversation. I said, this is a great place to raise kids, to accumulate wealth because the cost of living is low, taxes are low, and if you've got the right skills, people are dying to have African Americans, women come work for them if you've got the right skills, but you don't see that all the time, right? Chicago, you go up there, and I'll give you a great story. Chicago, they were talking about their Black Expo. Oh, we got Black Expo. Woo! I said, well, great. So is it like a week-long thing? Do you go again? No, it's 1 day. I said, 1 day? I said, down in Indianapolis, we may not be as progressive as you are, but we used to get a whole week, a whole month. So, so I think that you have to be really honest with the people that come here and what diversity means in Indiana, because there are some really good things. But you're not going to go out and have a festival, every other week where you see lots of people of color show up. You also have to find that in different areas. Like for me, it's been through my church community or joining certain associations, and then networking. Your network is so important because there's a rich bed of knowledge here and help as we talk about access and opportunity. So let's, as they say, I'm not going to front. This is not the place that's a bastion of cultural diversity. But if you come here and you understand that, it's great. If not, I've told people, hey, this is Indianapolis, it's Indiana. You're not going to make it into Chicago or DC overnight. So if you're not ready for that, then you should go somewhere else. Don't come here and be unhappy because people here are the people who they are, just like in DC and other places. So I think you have to be honest about that. And once you are, and you've got your priorities in terms of what you want to do, then you can make a decision. Should I go to Chicago or should I stay here? And I've lived in both places, and I like here because I wanted to raise a family. I like the pace of life, right? So I'm okay with it. And I think that's the starting point, at least for me, when I'm mentoring someone or I'm talking to someone about, what's it like in Indiana? I'm just very upfront with them.
Yeah, that's great. Noble, Mark, Christian, you want to add anything here? Well, I can say from my own experience, Mark, I'm sorry if I cut you off. Go ahead if you're getting ready to make a comment.
Yeah, that's okay. I guess one thing I've noticed, tackling the challenge of diversity, whether it's in our community or in our company or more broadly, it is not a passive activity. It is an active activity. And I think I've spoken with a lot of business leaders who care tremendously. But this example of connecting, whether it's a business leader that's come into Indianapolis or someone you've recruited of color that's come into your company from elsewhere, it is not a passive thing to get them connected to the community. You have to go do things, and it's a very individual thing in that case, right? And you have to sit down with somebody and find out what their interests are and where they might want to grow and where they feel like they might need mentorship, and then start calling people and find those connections, right? And I think, as Ted says, certainly we're not, the nation's bastion of diversity. None of us are saying that, right? We probably wouldn't be having this conversation if that were true. But there are resources, and there are just amazing human beings here that people can get connected in with. But you have to take steps. You have to do something.
That's exactly right, Mark. And you made a couple of points that I want to touch on. You said, to recruit diverse talent, certainly to retain them and keep them here, you have to connect them, right? You have to connect them to the community and the resources of the community. But that notion in and of itself means you have to be connected to the community, right? You can't connect people to other people that may or may not look like them, particularly diverse professionals, if you don't have any diverse professionals in your own personal network or professional network that you can call and say, hey, I've got a young lady here from Atlanta. She's interested in X. Do you know who I can connect her to, or can I connect her to you? So I think that's a great point in and of itself. Also, when we talk about leveraging the untapped resources, Ted made a great point about, he said, this isn't, the bastion of diversity. And I think that's true. But one of the advantages that I found in my own career, and maybe you all can echo this, is because this is not a bastion of diversity, diverse talent and professionals are put on a platform that they can excel in their careers and their business ventures and the opportunities they want to seek, because there is not going to be 4 and 5 people that look like them or have their skill set or have their experiences that they can bring to the table. So at least for me, as a woman in science, as a woman, diverse woman in patent law, where there's only 1.7% of diverse women in the field nationally, whether I know it or not, or like it or not, I kind of stand out in a way that I've learned to capitalize on, because I know there's not going to be somebody else right around the corner who's doing what I'm doing the way that I'm doing it and still have my diversity, right? So I have found that is a great opportunity to capitalize if you're comfortable in navigating that kind of environment. So for me personally, I think that is an untapped resource. We often look at the lack of diversity as such a negative thing, but I think for those who embrace it and take advantage of it, it can be the difference in your career trajectory, how quickly you get that venture capital, or how quickly you get that business off the ground in a lesser diverse environment than one that may be more diverse. So I think that's a resource that we very seldom highlight, that is actually very positive for Indiana and Indianapolis and the Midwest for diverse talent and diverse professionals. Anything you all want to say about that before we move on? I don't want to skip around too quickly. All right. So let's talk about, we've talked about kind of the resources that are available. Let's kind of flip the script a bit and talk about what, if any, unique or innovative solutions that you and your companies have employed or engaged in order to recruit or retain diverse professionals or diverse talent in your organization. Mark, you were talking about that ability to connect diverse professionals. But when you don't necessarily have or have not yet built a diverse network that we just mentioned you should have if you're in the business of recruiting and retaining diverse talent, what resources are available to you? What groups, organizations may you contact, or have you in the past contacted, in order to kind of build that social and professional support for diverse talent who may be coming to Indianapolis for the first time and don't know where to turn or where to go, meet or network with other diverse professionals? Anyone have some thoughts here?
Yeah, I can start on that. Yeah, within our company, we're working on some technology, and we have 2 key features within our technology. One would be match meetings, and I really believe that LinkedIn's a great platform. I consider it a very large professional directory, but I believe it's really underutilized. Some people have 10,000 connections on LinkedIn. They probably talk to 1% of those connections. They probably do business with less than 1% of those connections. And I really believe introductions and connections are important. And I believe platforms have to facilitate business. And people need more platforms that can facilitate businesses. And especially now that the world is kind of getting to a point where things are opening back up, people are looking to get out there, do more events, do more business, working on match meetings where people get matched to the right person to actually get in business with. And it streamlines the whole process of them scheduling a meeting and actually looking at the person's profile to figure out if this person is relevant for them. There's a match percentage too as well to indicate, is this person relevant to talk to or not, based off of X, Y, and Z. And they can have a conversation. And being able to have technology like that, I think, helps out too as well in the recruitment process too, because recruiters, hiring managers, staffers are wasting a lot of time kind of going through resumes and having all these conversations, and they really need more tools that can help them find relevant people quicker. So we're working on the tech and building that out and trying to figure out how we can apply that in different verticals. But that's what we're working on internally. Externally, I would say that there are a lot of resources out there, looking at HBCUs, Valence Community, ELC, a lot of great organizations out there that are doing a great job. So being able to just kind of be that connector, I think there are a lot of super connectors out there in the world. And if you can go out and be even a small version of a super connector and just reach out and say, hey, I see that, you have this pool of talent. Would love to connect with you. I'm here in Indianapolis. I'm here in XYZ city, and would love to plug in. Would love to have your people meet my people. I think that's kind of where business happens. Conversations start before any business happens. And I think people have to kind of put their, voice out there and see what can kind of shake.
That's great, Noble. Thank you. Others have some thoughts? I really appreciate you highlighting the HBCUs, because that's absolutely important. Anybody else have thoughts or comments here?
I'd share a couple of things. Noble mentioned, well, first of all, I have a really cool job, because if there's something in the world I want to see that doesn't exist, we get to just make it. That's our job, to make our own luck. And, Noble mentioned Valence. We were one of the very first investors in that business in their seed round, which was co-founded by a friend of mine in the firm named Kobe Fuller, who's a VC up front in LA.
Very cool.
Yeah, very cool. An awesome guy. And it was amazing to get plugged into that community, which has been a huge help to us as we've tried to create a context where diverse candidates, quite frankly, are more comfortable joining a bunch of white guys. We actually, it's interesting, we just launched our third fund. Our first three investments have all been in diverse-led businesses. And the reason I mention that, in addition to trying to break my arm, patting myself on the back, is that it's really, if you want diverse co-founders to come join your business, they need to know you back diverse co-founders, period. And so that it was important to us to not only put our money where our mouth was, but to put money into the things that we wanted to see exist. And it's been, if you look at it, and again, without this turning into a, hey, you should check out our portfolio companies, but Valence is a great example. The Mom Project, which we invested in, which is focused on bringing mothers, back into the workforce, I think are two really neat examples. The other thing that Noble began to touch on as well is, I think it's important to talk about, well, first of all, your network is your net worth, right? So when you think about like how you grow your net worth, it's largely a function of your network. And I think a lot of times we think of our network, we think of our professional network, we think of our familial networks, and never to the shall meet. Oftentimes we think about, oh, this is a great professional introduction, or et cetera, et cetera. Network building, specifically if you're trying to get into relationships with different communities, is got to be bi-directional. You can't just say, hey, do you know somebody, or would you be willing to meet with so-and-so? You got to do the same. And frankly, you probably got to make more deposits than withdrawals for that to be valuable over the long arc of time. And so I think one thing that gets lost in the shuffle a little bit is just the importance of building and investing in personal relationships. I have 6 kids and a very busy life, but when we moved to Indianapolis a few years ago, I asked my wife, I said, I would like us to host a new individual, couple, or family every week for a year, 50 dinner parties. Would you be willing to do that? And she said, yeah, I'd be willing to do that. And we've continued that now. We're in our kind of 5th year here in Indianapolis. And it has by far and away been the most enriching and effective strategy in me building my network, building relationships with people that don't work in the same vocation as me, that don't look like me, that don't live in the same neighborhood as me. And again, it's hard to kind of overstate the importance of not only looking for kind of the professional networking opportunities, but building friendships and being really committed to going into places where you don't normally spend a lot of time, either conceptually or physically, and building relationships with folks, where they're at.
I think that's a great point, Christian. And of course, I'm now wondering if you have a child named Dinner, but we'll get to that later. I think one of the things that you talked about is how the networking piece can work. And I think the LinkedIn is important. But I also think that being involved in your community, so just picking something, one of the things I did when I first started working was I joined the art museum they had a First Fridays, which was basically a big drinking get together. And a lot of those relationships, as we all kind of grew, have been fruitful over the years. My church, just going there and you meet different people, and all of a sudden you figure out, I've seen that person somewhere before. And and that turns into a relationship. So I'm not saying that because you need to join a civic thing, but there are a number of ways, as you touched on, to network. And once you begin to build your network, the funny thing happens, the older you get, the bigger your network gets. But if you reach out, there's some very simple things to do. Just going to a festival downtown sometime and seeing somebody that you know, and then they introduce you to another person, or going by a particular booth and being inquisitive about a small business. So there are a lot of ways, but I really think that the more you get involved in the community, and it can be anything, you'd be surprised the number of people that have either volunteered or will come in to speak and see your face. And I think there are tremendous opportunities, but networking is so critical nowadays, so critical.
I appreciate all of those comments. Christian, you touched on so much. I was about to, throw some money or get my, amen, because you were preaching there for a minute. You really said a lot. And I want to touch on this because I think so many women, and particularly in my women's organizations, we talk about how women struggle with networking. And I think part of that is because, they're coming from it, not just women, however you do it, from an inauthentic place. You're trying to meet that CEO or that new person rather than just being open to the relationships that you may build in the networking. Now, I do want to give kudos to your wife because she's much better than me. There is no way I'd be hosting random dinner parties for a year for random people I don't know. So she's got your back. Amen to her, but the point is still taken and appreciated that there is hardly any more authentic and vulnerable way to network than to invite people into your own home, right? Yeah. To expose all of you and your family. That's probably as authentic as it gets. So I can imagine that in and of itself jumpstarts the way that you build relationships when they've already been to your house and broken bread. And, that in and of itself will give so many people. And I will tell you specifically for diverse people, and maybe it's just me, but I know for myself, that is about as genuine as it gets, right? When someone opens their home and says, come over for dinner, come over for a drink, let's break bread. That's about as a real of a bond you can make with someone. So I can appreciate that people leaving your home saying, I just met Christian Anderson and went to his house. Yeah, you're going to drive real, authentic, long-lasting relationships like that because that's about as good as it gets. So kudos to you. I mean,
it's actually how I got invited on this panel. We had Emil and his wife over, and we met him at Ted, you're like this. We met him at an art gallery.
And that's fantastic. Well, all I can tell you is me and Ted will be looking for our invitation.
And have some hot sauce there. I'm not going to have hot sauce, so just,
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Mark looks like he wants to come along too. Let's just invite everybody over here.
InnoPower 2021, a party at Christian's house.
Chris is not smiling. He's not smiling anymore.
All right.
I'm going to just throw something in.
Yeah, please, Mark, please.
I think exactly. I'll come.
There's a fallacy with networking that it has to be difficult to be effective. I think what we've been saying in this panel right now is true networking is not transactional, it's relational, right? And relationships should generally be fun and easy, right? And so for you, whatever you like to do. So for me, just personally, I found a lot of great relationships through the education network in the city, both K through 12 and higher ed, because I just love to teach. And I'm passionate about it. My father was a teacher. My plan A was a professor. I think I was unqualified, so I went on to plan B. But just find something that you love, whether it's festivals or art or even tech, and just go do that and just form real relationships with people without any purpose whatsoever than just having the relationship. And you'll be surprised what it turns into.
That's exactly right. And Christian mentioned the value in having a network that's not just in your area, right? Knowing people in all facets of the community that you can connect people to and get connected to. we've certainly learned that I think you're exactly right, Mark, that, the business comes after the relationship. You find someone or meet someone that you enjoyed having a conversation with, or you enjoyed the coffee, or you didn't know that their son and your daughter went to the same high school. And then as you begin to get opportunities, you look for ways to kind of loop that person in or find business opportunities, as compared to kind of the reverse strategy we mentioned, where you go into the business event looking for the CEO and I'm going to get their number because I'm trying to sell them a million widgets or whatever, right? I personally have found I'm much more enhanced, enriched, not just professionally, but personally. I can go and enjoy a glass of wine and chit chat with just about anyone with no objective but to meet you and know you. And, next time we see each other at that community gala or that civic engagement, we'll have an opportunity to reconnect there. So we're getting a little short on time, but I want to ask one final question. And that is, I'd like for each of our panelists today to name a couple takeaways or action items that you would recommend to any business leader, business or corporation, entrepreneurial company, about how to not just retain and recruit that diverse talent. One of us mentioned, I think it was Christian, who mentioned, one of the primary ways to recruit diverse talent is to let them know you are authentic and genuine about recruiting diverse talent. And typically the best way to do that is to have diverse talent on your team, right? There's always got to be a first. Kamala said, I may be the first, but I won't be the last. But certainly when you have that first, it is important to continue that momentum, because I can tell you as a diverse professional, I'm looking at your company and your leadership and your DE&I statement, and whether you have a chief diversity officer or not, when I am evaluating your company and whether I believe it'll be a good fit for me when I'm making that move. So tell us some other things that you all think are important with regard to retaining, recruiting, advancing diverse talent in your company, and making that a rule rather than the exception for our local Indiana businesses. Whoever'd like to start, you can go.
I'll go first, and I'll try to be as short as possible. I think there are a couple of things. One, companies need to involve their minority community, both formally and informally, in their recruitment process. So it's one thing to send out a thing and say, hey, please refer your friends to come to our company. That obviously is the informal way, and you get millions of those emails and you do what you can. But I also think for me, I know that many companies have allowed me to actually do on-campus recruiting for everyone. So you begin to see a wide swath of what is available and what is success look like. And I think it's important because then you can give direct feedback. Also, it's important for them to see you and to have a sense of, okay, yeah, they're not, maybe this is just kind of a token interview, but to be involved gives them perspective. And then I think the second thing is that mentoring is an aggressive, action-oriented sport, particularly for minorities. If you have a mentoring program and the person doing the mentoring, it's not formalized, they don't have, you're not grading them on it, so to speak, then that program will fail. Because I'll tell you, there are many times, particularly for minorities, where they need to hear that I'm not only wanted, but we're going to give you direction as to where to go and how this place works to keep them there. And then I think you create a family environment around that. But if you're not aggressive in your mentoring, they're going to take the next best deal that comes along.
Yeah, that's great, Ted. Thank you. Others, please add.
Angel, I'd say two quick things. First of all, teach your team how to interview. People, as a general rule, are terrible at interviewing. And it's not something that can be fundamentally delegated to kind of the terminal owner of HR. You've got engineers interviewing engineers, designers interviewing designers. People are just bad at it. It's something that's not taught in school. It's typically not taught inside of the organization. There's very little visibility into what's happening during the process, and it can be a really cruddy, disorienting experience for anybody. Even if you're being interviewed by 10 people who look like you and sound like you, it's 10 times worse when that's not the case. So teach people how to interview. And if you don't know how to interview, learn how to interview, right? Learn how to be a good, graceful, fair interviewer. And then the other thing is there are a ton of organizations out there that want to help put you in a relationship with diverse candidates. We've partnered with HBCU.VC, which is an organization that's helping graduates of HBCUs move into venture roles. And we have our first HBCU VC intern starting this summer. And we would have never found Nathaniel if it wasn't for that relationship and that organization. And they're sitting there with their hands out, saying, we're ready. So, and of course that one's specific to venture capital, but there's variations of that theme for lots and lots of other industries. So don't be afraid to kind of ask for help from these organizations that already have the connectivity and the infrastructure in place to help connect you.
That's great, Christian. And there are plenty of professional organizations that are focused on diverse talent, the National Black, Society of Black Engineers, there's all runs the gamut that are available for, any organization to tap into. It's certainly a resource. Noble, Mark, last comments before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I believe we have like 1 minute, right?
That's right.
Awesome. So I'll just jump to some quick points. Christian really just definitely took something that I wanted to say, so that was perfect. Ted also touched on a few topics. Angela, you did as well too, talking about just being able to kind of build that environment too as well that just invites more diversity in that recruitment process. Interviewing is key. A lot of people don't have soft skills. They don't know how to interview, so I really like that. I would say a big thing really would be getting more people involved in that process, but also a lot of organizations don't have affinity groups. They don't have employer resource groups. Even small businesses need to have that. I think being able to change that behavior, have those groups reach out and also do community events, where those community events can attract other people to just come into the actual entrepreneurship or the business ecosystem, have conversations, and conversations drive interactions and drive transactions. So I think being able to just invite people into the ecosystem would be really great.
Thank you, Noble. That's great. Mark, you've got the last word.
Yeah, I think I'll just repeat the one thing I said earlier. This is not a passive activity. It's an active activity. And everything else in the business world that we business leaders care about and know requires action, we create a plan. So if you want two things to take away, create a plan, measure against the plan. If you do that, you'll get it done. We're Hoosiers. We get things done.
That's what we do, right? Like we did this, and I'm so proud. This was an exceptional panel. I am so pleased to have had the opportunity to speak with all of you, to have this opportunity to communicate to our audience some tips and takeaways to make our Indiana business community a little more open, a little more diverse, and a little more appreciative of the resources that we really do wield in this state. We really are amazing. And this is an amazing city and state to grow a business, to grow a family, and to really settle and make some roots. So thank you to each of you for joining me today, Ted, Christian, Noble, and Mark. I appreciate all of you and the opportunity to get to know you. With that, we're going to wrap up. Thanks to all who attended and listened. We appreciate you. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Yeah,
bye-bye.